The Labyrinth is a masterpiece. A messed up, weird, creepy, but fantastical masterpiece about a young girl who makes a steep bargain with a spicy older Goblin King and has to go through an impossible labyrinth to try to undo it. And it's weirdly zesty. It's a movie you watch hundreds of times and think, yeah, of course the middle ageless Goblin King loves a spoiled 15-year-old, totally normal. And then the years go by and you think, there's no way you remember that correctly, because why would Jim Henson of Sesame Street and Dark Crystal fame make a movie about a suave, tight pants Davie Bowie putting the moves on a near child? And then you rewatch it and yes, that is what happens, and you reevaluate your whole life, but then think, wait, maybe I misinterpreted this love story situation. So you get your hands on the novelization of the movie, read it through 3 times, and feel compelled to tell the world that boggling goblins, it somehow gets even creepier and weirder, friends and fiends. This is a very deep dive into the messed up happenings in the Labyrinth movie and book and why they happen. You'll never see the infamous ballroom scene the same way ever again. So I absolutely adore the Labyrinth. From the Ella Worm and Eyeball Moss to the Junk Woman, all have been with me only forever. That needs to be said because I can be so cruel, and I'm going pretty hard in this video. The novelization of the movie The Labyrinth follows the movie nearly exactly, from timelines to direct dialogue quotes, etc. Reading it is like watching the movie, but at your own pace. The book does get more descriptive because we, unfortunately, do not have Davie Bowie narrating his intentions to us while we turn the pages. Bummer. But what we do get instead is a ton of insight into the characters and their motivations, and some pretty unsavory details about Jareth that we simply couldn't get from just watching the movie, like these gems. He relished her face, then her white shoulders, her breast, hips, and legs, and moved closer to her, whose blood would serve to refresh his. In the book, we learn early on that Sarah's mother left the family behind to pursue an acting career. Sarah got to see her for her 15th birthday, and it was a day of glitz, glamour, Mercedes cars, shows, and swimming clubs. Her mother's boyfriend, Jeremy, buys Sarah a blue evening dress and, while dancing with her at a fancy restaurant, makes some odd comment about how, quote, a flashbulb meant that they'd be all over the gossip columns next morning, hinting that he, a famous grown man, being seen with an underage stunner would be quite the scandal. An odd thing to say, and I'm mentioning this because Sarah is treated very strangely by men in the actual Labyrinth as well, and Jareth, Jeremy kind of have a similar ring to them. The plot unfolds nearly beat by beat. Sarah wishes her baby brother away, regrets it immediately. And when the strange hot ferryman shows up in her bedroom, Sarah absolutely notes that he's wearing a tight waistcoat and tighter gray tights. And that soul-piercing gaze is neither friendly or fierce, but, quote, compelling. The way he understands her predicament is not lost on her. He can make her dreams come true, if only she'll leave her baby brother with him. She hesitates, but ultimately chooses her brother, which lands her in bad girl hot water with Jareth, who throws a snake at her while commanding, "Don't defy me." Leather-clad man barking orders, "Daddy, Daddy, get me out of here." She, of course, does defy him, which scares him a little, and so we go to the Labyrinth. It's pretty clear in the movie that Jareth is bored as the Goblin King. The book makes this even more obvious while also illuminating other key disturbing details about him. For instance, all this time he's been hoping to find a baby worthy of his companionship, who would understand his jokes and laugh at them, but also, quote, whose blood would serve to refresh his. Yeah, I don't think this is metaphorical. He's been searching for a baby whose high spirits could dispel his fear of aging, because yes, he has started to age. His mouth is tighter, he can feel the wrinkles forming on his forehead, and so make sure to raise his eyebrows just right to obscure them. He also avoids mirrors and reflective water to avoid seeing his aging self. I guess only forever time still ages you, no matter what kind of magic spell you use. All this aging perhaps because there is less of a demand for his baby-stealing services in the 1980s. But that's not all. He had toyed with potential other uses for Sarah. However, she is too old to be turned into a goblin, but too young to be kept by him. Damn her innocent eyes. Few things here. I think this kept in the sense of a literal kept woman or maybe a consort. You'll see why when we get to the ballroom scene shortly, but I don't think it matters what Sarah thought on the matter, likely because Jareth could just charm her with his compelling stare or magic crystal bubbles. The other thing I want to talk about is this innocence ascribed to Sarah in the book. It seems like it's coded to mean never been kissed or more involved coming-of-age activities. Both the movie and the book do make a point for Sarah's stepmother to say, "I would like it if you had a date. 15-year-old girls should have dates." Apparently, Sarah has been in her own imaginary world with no interest in dating yet, which is fine. In this context, Sarah is innocent of the saucy ways of the world and so can't be corrupted by Jareth. Yet. She is protected by it, but this innocence also makes her a target for a lot of lecherous revelers at the infamous ball. But before we attend that, while we're on this purity train, I'll mention the peach. In both stories, Jareth takes out a crystal which transforms into a peach and commands Hoggle to give it to Sarah. This will make her forget everything, of course, essentially drugging Sarah and impairing her judgment. Not great, but the book makes it kinda weirder. Peaches, as you might know, are a visceral code for nether parts. So when Hoggle, quote, fingers the peach in his leather pouch, it feels a little uncomfortable. But Sarah's internal thoughts seal the deal. Quote, Sarah looked at the peach almost with regret. It was a pity to spoil such a lovely thing. Although that was the point, wasn't it? A peach made itself lovely just so that someone would spoil it. So she spoils the peach, which transports her to the masquerade, where everyone is lasciviously waiting to spoil her peachy innocence. The ballroom is stunning. Threadbare but enchanting, chandeliers that have candles that have been burning for hundreds of years, their wax dripping into stalactites. As luscious as the room is, Sarah commands all of the masked attention. Quote, she was the picture of innocence in that setting, a picture that excited the dancers while they moved with weary grace to the cadence of a sinisterly beautiful tune. They are like vultures to her innocence. Quote, she caught a glimpse of Jareth, entwined with the voluptuous woman dancing past. What kind of party is this, Jareth? Oh, we're about to find out because, quote, she did not notice the young man leaning against the column beside her. He had his head held back and was staring brazenly at her. He relished her face, then her white shoulders, her breasts, hips, and legs, and moved closer to her. He murmured into her ear, you are remarkably beautiful, my dear girl. Jareth creepily watches this unfold. Now, in the movie, this scene was always charged with an overpowering seductive energy. Then you read these lines in the book and holy bog of eternal stench, it's right there, staring you in the face like the ever-gazing masked dancers. In the book, we don't have Bowie singing about us falling in love and placing the moon inside our hearts. What we do get is the true intentions of the characters, and they are pretty overt. Sarah, dressed in the most gorgeous gown, courtesy of Jareth, is searching frantically for him. Quote, when she found him, he was whispering something to his beautiful partner, who responded by smiling knowingly from beneath her mask and licking her lips. Slowly, with the tip of her tongue, Sarah blushed and turned away in embarrassment. When Jareth begins to dance with her, Sarah relishes the feel of Jareth's hands on her body. Jareth smooth talks his way past Sarah's defenses, telling her to, quote, trust to her dream, all whilst pulling the wool over her eyes with his imposed dream. It works, and the time is right for a kiss. Sarah closes her eyes in anticipation, but then silence. Silence that alerts her to wake up and see all the other dancers leering and nearly laughing at her as they surround the couple, watching. A real-time gossip column like Jeremy mentioned in Mundane Life. Quote, Jareth seemed to be unperturbed, but she turned her face sharply away from his, horrified. He held her more tightly and insistently sought her lips with his. Suffused with disgust, she wrenched herself free of him. This is getting pretty violent, or at least very pushy. As the clock strikes 12, quote, Sarah pushed her way through the jostling, jeering crowd. A man smiled foxily at her behind his mask and then grasped at her body. She smelled his evil breath on her face. Leave the poor girl alone. Sarah breaks the spell and then gets deep into victim blaming herself for the actions of the men at the ball. Quote, she closed her eyes at the memory of Jareth, hot with shame at how she had succumbed to his charm. She felt soiled by what had ensued in the ballroom. Somehow it had been all her fault. Those men who pawed at her, Jareth trying so rudely to force a kiss upon her. Had she been truly innocent, they would not have behaved like that toward her, would they? Sarah, yes they would have. Think to the peach, remember what happens to peaches. She's come so far and has grown up so much in this maze, but hopefully now learns not to take on responsibility for grown men's actions and attentions. Yeesh. But because she kept herself to herself, her innocence is still protective, and she remains a real threat to Jareth, who truly has no power over her. At this point in the book, the illusion of the Goblin King loving Sarah has long been a bubble that has burst. This is where the stories are different, and going forward in the book, we have the same adventures as in the movie, but we don't have Davie Bowie saying that he moved the stars for Sarah. The Goblin King does not feel betrayed by her lack of love, only that she is so cruel and that he is so cruel too. So they are a good match in that way. Sounds like a fun relationship. Gone is the saucy energy and the glamour of love. But here's the thing, it kind of works as a great bookend for the, well, book. At the start, Sarah enjoyed the attentions of Jeremy, her mom's beau. He even gave her a fancy dress to wear and dance with him in. She is, quote, innocent and has not started hanging out with other people her own age in a dating sense. So her only notion of that world is when her mom and Jeremy took her out for her birthday. That is her frame of reference, and is almost exactly how she interacts with Jareth, until that illusion is broken. The world of the Labyrinth is a bit dark and predatory, because in a way that's part of growing up, navigating other people's less than pure attentions and intentions, and finding out who you really are while doing that. The Labyrinth is a more modern take on a classic fairy tale trope exploring this, such as Little Red Riding Hood and its variations. Fortunately, no wolves or grandparents were harmed in the telling of this one. The Labyrinth is Sarah's own creation to try on her fantasies in a way. Sarah grows up a lot in the maze, drops the "it's not fair" refrain, and starts standing up for herself. She learns that she is not defined by the trinkets she hoarded around her bedroom, and that the one good time she had with her absent mother and boyfriend was also just an illusion. One day of fun versus literally every other day her stepmother had been present for Sarah. She just didn't see it. Sarah had lived in a selfish bubble, and this whole labyrinthine experience was her coming of age and figuring herself out. Awkward, saucy older Goblin King encounters and all. The overall message is present in both, but perhaps without the visual distraction of Jareth's tight tights, it seems a bit more pronounced in the book. But what are your bogging goblin thoughts? Has the book changed your perspective on the movie at all? Enhanced it? Or what is your favorite quote from the movie? You can't look where you're going if you don't know where you're going, but you're in great hands if you find yourself on Nebula, our creator-owned and operated streaming service where we get to experiment with exciting new high-caliber content that might be a little too ambitious and or spicy for other platforms. I release all of my videos on Nebula first before they are live on YouTube, so Nebula members get early access to my deep dives and very cool announcements. Nebula is filled with exclusive original content that only lives there, like fellow creator Tale Founder's exploration into Neil Gaiman's creative process, which covers some of my favorite works, like Coraline and the Sandman. You can even download episodes in the app and listen to them on the go, or drift off to sleep while listening to me recount the creepiest of dark fairy tales. My library of creepy a bit late stories lives on Nebula too. All of this with no ads to startle you out of your slumber or creative zone. At Nebula, we're striving to make original content that matters and are growing our creative team to make these dreams a reality. And members help make this all possible. You can join us today by using my link go.nebula.tv/abitfrank to check us out and to get a generous discount on an annual membership. Or stick around forever with a lifetime membership, or gift Nebula to friends and family with gift cards. Using my link supports my channel directly, just like watching my videos over there does. Thank you so much for checking out go.nebula.tv/abitfrank and seeing what Nebula is all about. I hope to see you there very soon. Thanks for watching this weird, deep, nerdy dive into the Labyrinth book versus movie. Subscribe so you won't miss the next video stewing in the cauldron right now. Stay spooky!